not to put the evil eye on it. If you say, "Oh, it's working,"
Okay.
then
Okay.
okay. So can you adjust it so it's actually
Yeah.
Because from Italy, there's one called the light protection is evil.
So this is the first time we're live streaming something on the part of the Sterling Institute for Jewish Studies in Modern Israel. So thank you for your patience. If you're still out there trying to find us or listen to us, we took us 10 minutes to set it up. And hope that everybody stays safe if you're watching from your homes or dorms or everything else. I'd first like to thank our co-sponsors. So we're in James Madison College and also the Residential College of Arts and Humanities and the College of Social Science and the College of Arts and Letters, the Asian Studies Center, the Center for European, Eurasian, and Russian Studies, and the Political Science Department have all helped co-sponsor our third panel assessing the Israeli elections in a single year. We had one in March last year after the first set of elections. We had one in September with Professor Alon Tal in the second elections. And it's a great honor to have Professor Eli Rekes with us from Northwestern University tonight. So some of you have heard me already in the previous two sections, but I'm going to give a quick general kind of comments and introduction, and then I'll hand it over to Dr. Eli Rekes. Let me just give you his quick bio. We have a very shortened version, but he's one of Israel's leading experts on the Arab minority in Israel and Jewish-Arab relations. He recently authored, edited, and co-edited Muslim Minorities in Non-Muslim Majority Countries, the Test Case of the Islamic Movement in Israel, and the Arab Society in Israel, a compendium, Arab Youth in Israel, Caught Between Prospects and Risk, the Arab Minority in Israel Analysis of the Future Vision Documents, the Arab Minority in Israel in the 17th Knesset Elections, Together But Apart, Mixed Cities in Israel, the Involvement of an Arab-Palestinian National Minority in Israel. And these are just books in the past 13 years of an extensive lifetime of achievement. Dr. Rekes was also telling us about how he had consulted for various Israeli prime ministers and Israeli governments on these issues over time. And he really has a wealth of experience. So we're really looking forward to hearing from him. Before we get started, I want to give you kind of just a little bit of taste. I know it's always difficult because some of you are reading the Israeli news every single day or researching it yourselves or talking or teaching about it, and others don't know much about Israel that usually are chiming in and knowing about it. So I'm trying to give a little bit of introduction first. I'll give you a little sense of what the results were. Well, you probably can't see it on the live streaming as well, so I'll go through it quickly with you. But what I was explaining, but kind of both in March and September, is that Israel is an extremely polarized society and has been for decades. And so that when you look, the elections have been extremely close, which is one reason they haven't been able to form a coalition in the past few attempts, both in March and in September as well. And this third set of elections basically again speaks to that testament that you have these right and center, center right, center left blocks, so to speak, that haven't moved very much from election to election, but mainly there's been a shift within blocks from election to election. So even if you look, there's again, marginal changes here and there since the September elections that I'll go through with you. I was trying to update this chart today, but with all the chaos at MSU, with things closing down, moving online, emergency in Michigan, I didn't quite get to do that. But if you see, Likud gained maybe 4 seats. The Israel Beitenu lost a seat, and the Arab parties, or the joint list that Professor Rekes will be talking about, gained 2 seats. And if you look at different shifts among it, you'll see more or less there wasn't a dramatic difference or a huge difference, arguably, between the blocks, between each election, but you get slight shifts possibly within, often more so than between. And so blue and white was trying to get more, appeal to more soft right voters, so to speak, to vote for blue and white. but wasn't quite as successful and was saved, so to speak, in terms of the number of seats he has in the block, mainly by the joint list, right, adding 2 seats. And maybe also here, slight shifts with the other parties, right? So if you look at it again, this also shifts, it's 58 seats, and rather than the 61 seats needed in the end of the day. So I went through kind of the last couple of times why I think the center-left parties weren't successfully able to challenge Likud in the past few years, and went through some of the dissatisfaction with the stagnation in the peace process, with unilateral withdrawals that aren't perceived to have gone well, with continued violence, with still divisions within the center-left bloc, and also, for instance, this light for the I think I'm going to turn off the PowerPoint actually, because no one can see it, and the light is kind of bothering me when I'm trying to have the computer see it. So I'm just going to shut that down. Yeah, that's better. It's distracting me. So basically, for a variety of those reasons, the center-left hasn't been able to adequately really challenge the right. But on the other hand, you also have less of a distinction ideologically between some of the right and center parties, as some of the right people have left the right to establish center parties on one hand, and on the other hand, you can see in the past few elections a dilution of the difference, the differentiation ideologically between the parties that are running, right? So even if you look in blue and white today, because partially they were trying to attract people from the right in order to gain more seats than the Likud party, their message, their platform was kind of more fuzzy in terms of the differentiation between Likud, arguably about a variety of issues, including the Trump peace plan that just came out, where Gantz felt hard put to kind of be critical of it, in the face of the necessity of appealing to the soft right in Israel in order to boost his seats up in this kind of static bloc situation, right? So part of the difficulty that Blue-White had, other than the individual kind of mess ups that he had in terms of not being an orator like Netanyahu is the whole messaging itself, right, becomes less differentiated. As on one hand, you're trying to keep parties that are on the center left to vote for you, and on the other hand, you're trying to appeal to parties on the soft right and peel votes from the Likud, which he wasn't as successful really in doing since September, right? Which is why, even though 2 weeks before this March election, you had the expectation that blue and white would have relatively more seats, and then just in the week before election, that was diminished again. So one thing that I want to concentrate on, as I've been working on another kind of project on where the legitimacy of the two-state solution lies. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the possible implications of this particular election and the possible coalitions that can come out of it, as to what difference that perhaps could make to that particular issue, right, to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and chances to resolve it in one way or another, or to have movement in it. Or where would the legitimacy of the two-state solution depend in that sense? So on one hand, as many of you know, for many years, arguably since 1939, but also especially since Oslo, the main paradigm has been for years the two-state solution for resolving the conflict. That's been kind of almost hegemonic in the international community in terms of the United Nations, the EU, Russia, the Arab League since the Saudi plan of 2001, that was reiterated by the Arab League every year, as well as in 2013. So you have this regional support, international support, among public opinion among Israelis and Palestinians that rose even during the Second Intifada. Right, you had polling show that many were willing to negotiate, that they were actually becoming more amenable in terms of concessions that they'd be able to make. And even as far as 2016, arguably at times, there was a majority, even if it was sometimes only 51%, 53%, in both populations, Israeli and Palestinian, for a two-state solution. As many of you know, that's been challenged in the past few years, partially because of the stagnation in the peace process, and other reasons that have decreased. And if you look at political polling, I have one of my professorial assistants who's been helping me with that polling. Most recently, even in September, the support for a two-state solution among Palestinians dropped to 42%. And so that legitimacy gets eroded, and that's just one measure that I'll talk about because I want to talk briefly so we can hear from Professor Rekas. Yet they're still kind of relative to the alternatives, both in public opinion polls and in terms of paradigms that are advocated by the regional institutions and international institutions, and in terms of any kind of negotiations or movements or organized movements that are behind kind of real alternatives to the two-state solution. Those are all weaker, any alternative, than the legitimacy of the two-state solution itself, whether you look at public opinion polls as an alternative or whether you look at regional and international responses. However, and this is where I'm getting to the Israeli elections that took place a week ago, most recently, I think there are several contingencies which really can determine, right, whether the legitimacy of the two-state solution continues to face greater challenges on one hand, or whether on the other hand, you have kind of a return to at least a situation where that solution is still viable, if not strengthened in the immediate term. And what conditions or contingencies determine that? One of those are heavily who is the Israeli leadership, who's the Palestinian leadership, and who's the American leadership. So we're facing elections in the United States. We just had a set of 3 elections in Israel. There are no yet elections in the Palestinian community, but you face kind of challenges to the legitimacy of both Fatah and Hamas. So the composition of the government, I think, despite the fact that arguably there's not a dramatic difference between Gantz and Netanyahu on this topic, or in their rhetorical response to the Trump peace plan that just came out recently, even though there's not a dramatic difference between the two, there's still a difference that can be quite significant, I think, over the next few years in terms of what coalition could emerge, right, from this past election. And we don't know yet what coalition will emerge or who will be even asked to form the coalition first, right? Apparently that will be decided next week, and then they'll have a chance to see if they can form a coalition. So one possibility, right, would be that, and Professor Rekas may talk more extensively about this as well, that there might be a narrow coalition that blue and white could still try to hold on to with the support of the joint Arab-Israeli parties who won 15 seats, and Labor Gesher Meretz, and Lieberman's primarily Russian, but not exclusively Russian party, that they together could cobble together some kind of narrow coalition that would then at least, right, prevent a deterioration in the situation that could otherwise come about through an attempt to try to unilaterally implement some of the Trump peace plan, right? The Trump peace plan, unlike any previous Republican or Democratic administrations' plans that were framed on the Clinton parameters, really diverges from previous sets of peace negotiations and in terms of the Clinton parameters themselves, in allowing Israel to keep significantly a greater portion of the West Bank, to not divide Jerusalem in any way, which Olmert in his 2008 proposition was willing to concede most of East Jerusalem, in trying to keep the Jordan Valley, and also in trying to perhaps move 300,000 or so Palestinians of Israeli citizenship to a new Palestinian state, perhaps whether they want to or not, right? Theoretically, all these things are part of this plan, which is a significant divergence from all previous peace plans, and arguably would allow for Israeli attempts at unilateral annexations in the West Bank if Netanyahu we'll be able to form a coalition, right-wing coalition. And perhaps if Trump won a re-election and the two together over arguably another 4 years, it would be very tempting for such an Israeli government to try to attempt, with a green light and encouragement from the Trump administration, to start engaging in some unilateral annexations, which would be, which could do real damage, right, to the legitimacy of the two states, both in undermining further confidence for the two states in both populations, as well as perhaps over time, if that public support decreased significantly, you might, after a certain point, really see weaknesses in regional and international support that basically would support what the Palestinians want at some point, and diverge from their previous almost hegemonic support for a two-state solution, right? So in the worst case scenario, right, if Netanyahu were able to cobble something together, that would be the case, right, in terms of this particular issue. On the other hand, there's a real possibility, and Netanyahu may be advocating to move to a fourth set of elections in October, right? And if that were to happen, in terms of undermining the legitimacy of the two-state solution, it wouldn't be as significant in moving in that direction as if he were able to cobble down another kind of right-wing government. But even if he just had a few more months in office until October, and arguably he thinks he might even be able to do better in the fourth set of elections in October, but even within a few months, he may face a temptation to do some kind of move of unilateral annexation just in the mere months until October, which again could be pretty provocative in terms of the tensions in the area, partly invoking more violence, and a worst case scenario as well, having the PA say they're going to dismantle or stop security cooperation with Israel. It's not very likely because Abbas has his own personal interests in wanting to maintain that cooperation, but that's a possibility that could undermine the legitimacy of two states. Or you could have the possibility of a unity government, right, where there is some pressure on many parts of the Israeli society and on Reuven Rivlin, the president of Israel, to really pressure Netanyahu and Gantz to make the compromises they weren't able to make in the last two sets of elections, to avoid a fourth election, partly because it almost becomes even more embarrassing for a democracy to have 4 elections in a year, not be able to get their act together to form a coalition, partly because you don't have a budget, right? So from what I understand, even 30% of the funding that goes to the Israel Defense Forces or goes to religious yeshivot and the money they want, the funding for organizations is not there, perhaps until you form a government, and there's pressure there. So there's a possibility for a unity government, and what would look like, as many of you know, as in the previous elections, Gantz has refused to either serve with Netanyahu or saying that if we'd have a unity government, he would have to serve first, right? Hoping that then perhaps Netanyahu would be indicted. He goes on trial next week, March 17th, Netanyahu. And then by the time it came to Netanyahu's rotation, he would already maybe be in jail or indicted, and Gantz could retain the premiership. For the exact same reason, of course, Netanyahu's wanted to be first in the rotation and be first prime minister. Now, the latest I've heard, who knows, that if one of the scenarios for a unity government would be that Netanyahu serves the first year and then Gantz the second 2 years, would Gantz in any way be able to compromise on that? That certainly would be very difficult for him to do. So he certainly would be more likely to want to form this narrow coalition of his own rather than a unity government. But that's certainly a possibility, right? He now has had 2 members of Blue and White defect, and then the main person from Gesher in the Labor Gesher Meretz alliance defected. So while he could have formed a coalition just a few days ago, a narrow coalition, without having the Balad party, one of the 4 parties of the joint list in it, now his chances for doing that are diminished after those defections, and he'd be forced. Not defected yet. They're thinking about. They say they're going to defect. Potentially defect.
From the joint list.
Yeah. So So then you have the scenario of maybe bringing Balad in, but that's the most nationalist Palestinian party that diverges most from the Zionist parties and would have that challenge. Or Gantz can ask, right, can say that these two potential defectors will be thrown out of the blue and white party, and maybe there could be room for maneuvering for him there. Or, right, there's the option that next week he tries to pass a law that an indicted prime minister can't serve as prime minister or try to form a government. And maybe there's room there for him to kind of diminish the bargaining power of Netanyahu in the situation, so that Netanyahu would have to make many more compromises in a unity government, or would have to succumb to Gantz forming coalition. From what we understand, everything is up in the air to some extent in terms of these possibilities, and even the possibility for a fourth election. So on one hand, again, at the margins, it may appear as if any of these scenarios won't make a dramatic difference in terms of even, let's say, Israel's foreign policy. I'm not even going to talk to now the effects it has on Israel's democracy itself and checks and balances system and how powerful the high court is in Israel and has all those extremely important potential influences. But even on this particular issue of the legitimacy of two states and keeping that option as a viable option, there can still be significant differences among these potential scenarios and potential coalitions that don't on the face of it appear dramatic, but actually could very well have dramatic consequences if it means unilateral annexation of any parts of the West Bank or significant parts versus not, could make still a very, very significant difference. So I think even though we might be fatigued by a third election and the possibility of a fourth election, these things are still pretty weighty, I think, in their significance for both domestic politics and foreign policy. I've talked way too much, and I'd love to hear from Professor Rekkes, who's going to especially talk about the influence of the Arab-Israeli parties, their influence changes over time, or potential dramatic difference on which scenario will actually take place in Israel and their powerful role in that.
Is it okay that I speak from the podium?
Yep, I'll do that. I'll show you what it looks like when you do.
It's good.
So,
Yeah.
getting divided. Maybe use the computer. So,
Okay, I don't.
That's what.
Yeah.
7 people.
Okay.
Can you close that? Move the laptop closer.
Okay. So thank you very much. I would first like to thank Yael and the Sterling Institute now. Congratulations on the Institute, Yael. For inviting me here. I always love to speak to huge crowds. I'm energized by the response of large crowds. It invigorates me. It gave me a good opportunity to review what has happened within the Arab sectors in the recent elections, and I'm really happy to be here and to share with you my impressions. Now, a lot has been said and talked about the Arab vote in the recent elections. If you follow the Israeli media, one gets the impression that the fate of a future government, as you rightly indicated, is all dependent to a large extent on the inclusion of the alliance of a 15-member strong Arab joint list, Hareshima Meshutefet in Hebrew, an eclectic list made up of 4 Arab parties headed by Ayman Odeh in a future coalition. if so, what is being spoken of is that the Gantz will form a minority government with the outside support of the Arab list. And the election to the 23rd Knesset in the Arab sector will indeed represent a major paradigm shift, perhaps even a sea change in the structure and nature of our politics in Israel, and perhaps even Jewish-Arab relations in Israel. So this is what we want to investigate tonight. And I'm going to do this with your help by looking at the following points. First, I want to look at the results very quickly, so I don't have a PowerPoint. So I want to look at 3 or 4 points that pertain to the results. Then proceed with the question whether can the electoral success, because there was a success, as we already know, a rise in the turnout and more Knesset seats, whether the electoral success can be translated into tangible political achievements, because it's one thing to get more votes, and the other thing is whether these have any efficacy. And then end with some speculative remarks, as you just did in the last 10 minutes. So let's begin first with the voting patterns, with the results. First point to highlight is that we have observed a dramatic increase in the voter turnout. In fact, in the last 3 elections this year, and you correctly indicated that, I tell my students who are unfamiliar with the Israeli landscape of politics that Israel is the most democratic country in the world. Where do you have a country which holds 3 election campaigns a year? 3, and maybe even 4. It's so they're very impressed by this. So in the last 3 election campaigns, we have seen a continuous rise in the participation of the Arab sector in Israel. In April 2019, 49%, then it rose in 10% to 59%, and most recently to 65%. So it's 15% within 3 lapses. And in the last lapse, it's 6%. So we have to look at it in perspective and don't be overly impressed, because this is not a continuous trend over the years. Over the years, the trend went up and down. We have seen years that the turnout went down as low as 18. For example, after the October riots of 2003, the turnout went as low as 18%, 18. So I don't have time to go into a deeper analysis of what keeps the turnout up or down, but it is not stable. It may go up and may go down. And in fact, the second section of my analysis is a more detailed analysis, what brought the percentage up this most recent election. I'll give at least 5 such reasons and causes. So yeah, and by the way, just what is even more impressive is that this 65%, 65, is getting closer to the nationwide percentage within Israel. I don't have the division between Jews and Arabs. I don't have the percentage for Jewish rate of vote. For some reason, the Central Committee of Election doesn't provide that. They do provide, you can get the percentage of Arab and Druze, by the way. Just since this is now documented, I have to be careful. And it's broadcast nationwide, right? So I have to be even more careful. Anyway, the nationwide rate of participation turnout was 71%. So it's only 6% difference, which is very, very interesting and impressive. I'll speak about the process of Israelization in 2 pages time, 2 or 3 pages time. So remember that point. Okay. Second point, representation in the Knesset. The Arabs in Israel, I should have started perhaps with some general comments about the Arab population in Israel. For those who are not unfamiliar with the Arab minority in Israel. They constitute today 21% of the total population. And again, when I say Arab, I mean Arab and Druze, but for a reason of convenience, I will not repeat Druze each time. With all due respect to the Jewish community, I refer to Arabs and Druze. The Druze constitute 8 or 9% of the total population. So just for reason of convenience, I dropped the name Druze. No political implication, no personal implication, nothing of that kind. So 21% of the population. The fact that altogether there are 17 Arab and Druze Knesset members today, 15 of the joint list, 2 in other parties, 1, if I'm not mistaken, is in Israel Betenu, and 1 in Gesher Meretz Ha'avodah, if I'm not mistaken, or in the Likud. I'm not certain. I have to check that. But what is important that 17 out of 120 is, how much is it? I'm not very good in math, but
less than 15%.
Thank you, sir. Less than 15%. So it's a sizable percentage. But going back to the joint list received 15 seats, 2 more than in September 2019. It strengthened its representation. One, parenthetically, I would add, one of these 15 is attributed to Jewish voters. I'll return to that point later on. 4 of the seats that the joint list has gotten are women. Interesting. A new phenomenon within the Arab voting patterns. The joint list is the 3rd largest faction in the Knesset today. Generally speaking, due to the change in the threshold arrangement in Israel, the number of parties or factions in the Knesset has been reduced significantly now, and the joint list is the 3rd largest one. The 3rd point, as far as the results, is the division, or let me put it differently, where do the votes of the Arabs go between Arab parties and Jewish parties? It's very clear nowadays that unlike the situation in the 50s and the 60s, and to a large extent in the 70s, most of the Arabs vote for Arab parties. 87% of the votes went to the joint list. Now, I have to make a correction, not because now everything is documented. God, you didn't prepare me for that. But thank God that I have everything in writing. I say joint list, Arab list, this is not fully correct. Hadash, which is one of the major components of the joint list, is a Jewish Arab party. So it's incorrect to say Arab party, Arab party, Arab party. Joint list, correct. Joint list has a Jewish Arab component. And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, one of the 15 is a Jew. Asaf Kasif is a Jew. And I think he was elected as one of the 15. Today in class, the kids immediately check this online, but we don't have. But anyway, so just to be on the accurate side. So, but the important thing is that 87% of the votes went to the joint list, and only 12.4 went to Jewish Zionist Party. Again, a major change compared to what used to be the situation in the 60s, 70s, 60s. Zionist and Arab affiliated list grabbed most of the votes of the Arabs. So you see the change in the leading, in the tendencies, in the trend where Arab votes go to. Okay, so these were general indications as to the results. The thing that interests us is what caused the rise in the turnout. So I can allude to 5 major causes that brought about the change. Number 1, obviously, so not revealing a big secret, the drive to remove Netanyahu. Unreserved urge of ousting Netanyahu. The Joint List had hoped to be a major barrier, obstacle to the establishment of what they called a, quote, an extreme right-wing government. Likud and Netanyahu were continuously accused of demonizing, and rightly so, the Arab public. Netanyahu's rhetoric against the Joint List, Ahmad Tibi, encouraged Arab voters to take to the polls. Bibi coined the infamous slogan, "It's either Bibi or Tibi," and of course the two rhyme. Ahmad Tibi is a well-known veteran Arab politician and head of one of the factions that constitute Tal Ra'am, which constitute the Joint List. So, or Bibi or Tibi became a very well-known slogan that Bibi continuously repeated, meaning that either you vote for me or you'll get Tibi as a Gantz supporter, and I'll come back to this point. So we are still on the first point that I bring up as an explanation why Arabs voted for the Joint List, a drive to remove Netanyahu. Netanyahu has said that any attempt by Gantz to form a government should be illegitimate, as it would necessitate support from the Joint List, which the Prime Minister has characterized as a party of, quote unquote, terror supporters. Repeat, terror supporters. Number two, a second point, which I think from a contents point of view, much more important, the process of Israelization. Now, Israelization is a term that I helped coin alongside my colleague, Sami Smuha, in the late 70s. I was responsible for coining the term Palestinization, which he strongly opposed at the time. He came up with the term Israelization, which I strongly opposed at the time, and we met somewhere in the middle in the 80s. He growingly accepted the term Palestinization, and I the other way around. Anyway, in this case, I think Israelization provides an answer. So by Israelization, we refer to the process of integration of the Arab and Druze minorities in Israel into the Israeli societies. Arabs who are more willing to accommodate and adopt the lifestyle, the language, the culture, the political, and the other major characteristics of the dominant majority group in Israel, the Jewish majority. Now, Israelization oftentimes is referred as representing the civic aspect of identity, and is defined by and measured by the degree of engagement of the Arab sector with the Israeli society, socially, economically, and as I said, politically so. Now, the high turnout of the Arab minority in these elections is a clear indication, in my view, that the vast majority of the Arab citizens in Israel opt for the Israeli citizenship positively, wants to actively influence the political discourse, and wants to have its say, or their say, recall, over the future of their land. 65% of the Arab electorate makes a very clear and sound statement which cannot be ignored or denied in their voting, in the way they vote. I'm sorry. Now, I relate this term to another developing phenomenon in the Arab sector in recent years, and this is the rise of an emergent middle class in the Arab sector. A middle class which is growingly or increasingly integrated and entrenched into the fabric of societal life in Israel. One expression of this socioeconomic change is the newfound wish for faster and greater integration by participating in the political game, which we saw with a growing rate of participation, 65%. I'm going to the third reason which explains the growth in participation, and this is what you already alluded to, the Trump plan, the deal of the century. Now, leading up to the March 2020 elections, the Joint List was relatively quiet on Trump's plan. It did call it racist, but never went too far in condemning it or criticizing it. It wasn't on its agenda to a large extent. However, when Netanyahu pursued the plan and spoke about beginning to annex tracts of Palestinian land, this led a previously apathetic Arab-Israeli electorate to the ballot boxes. In particularly, and again, you mentioned it already, Israeli Arabs began to be concerned about the land swap issue. Now, the land swap issue is not new. Avigdor Lieberman has raised it several times in the past, and the idea is to exchange parts of the triangle area, of the little triangle area. You know, parenthetically here, that whenever I begin a course on the Arabs in Israel, I ask my students in Israel and here, by the way, where is the triangle? Can you show me the three corners of the triangle? And students all over are very achievement-oriented, and they quickly try to find the three corners of a triangle. And there is no triangle, of course. Or there is a triangle which used to be in the West Bank under the British mandate, Jenin, Tulkarem, and Jenin, Tulkarem, Nablus. So they give you very interesting triangles. But this, I'm just joking. Anyway, the little triangle is but actually there is a banana shape, ellipse, alongside what used to be the green line. So, as you said, this area is proposed, Avigdor Lieberman proposed to transfer it to a future Palestinian state already a couple of years ago, and the plan was received with staunch opposition. The same here, according to the plan, borders would be redrawn, some 300,000 citizens would become part of a future Palestinian state and be put under the jurisdiction of the Palestinian Authority. Arabs in Israel vehemently, vigorously rejected the Trump plan. Why?
And that in particular.
Pardon me?
That part of it, especially.
Yes, of course. I'm speaking about this plan. Absolutely so. Why? For obvious reason. I'm saying it cynically, and pardon me for the statement. I say it's not a punishment to be an Arab in Israel in this respect. One does not give up quickly the blue and white identity card for the benefits of being a Palestinian citizen, for the good socioeconomic position in Israel, who wants to be a citizen of a Palestinian state that suppresses the freedom of speech and other basic democratic rights. I'm coming to point number 4. I'm still under the section that tends to explain how come that, because we need to provide answers to that. Disappointment with guns. And you'll see in 4 pages time how the situation flipped overnight. But disappointment with guns. February 2020, Blue-White Party leader Gantz vows that he would not join a coalition with the Joint List. Vows. It echoes his position in March 2019, in which Gantz says he would call for a unity government with all parties, including Likud and anyone else who is Zionist and sane, presumably excluding the Joint List. I'm saying it laughingly because we'll see how he flip-flopped his position. Now, Ayman Odeh pushed back and he said, Gantz could not form a ruling coalition without us. Again, this pushed people to the polls. Reason number 5, the campaign tactic. Now, this is very, very interesting. The Joint List really did an excellent job, if I may say so, as someone who has been involved in consulting. They did a really good job. It gained numerous votes from from a combination of factors. Number 1, from the Jewish sector. as I mentioned before, almost one seat of Jewish votes were gained from Jewish vote. How did this happen? Disillusioned Jewish voters from Meretz. Netanyahu's agitation against Israeli Arabs has fostered growing support from these circles. Number two, they addressed themselves to ultra-Orthodox Jews. As such, they launched campaign in Yiddish in ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods, highlighting the marginalized status of both Israeli Arabs and Orthodox Jews against the Israeli government, emphasized opposition to military service of both communities. Then they sought support from Ethiopian Israeli voters. Again, as in Amharic, focused on disproportionate amount of police violence directed at both Ethiopian Jews and Arab Israelis. Joint list success may also be attributed to Arab mayors coming out and calling on residents to vote for Arab parties. Arab women were given prominent places on the ticket, so it became an incentive for Arab women to vote. As I said, number 14 and number 15 on the list were Sundus Saleh from Tal and Iman Khatib from Ram, associated with the Islamic Party. Now we have a hijab women, muhajjaba, in the Knesset, Iman Khatib. Definitely unprecedented event in the history of the Knesset. More elements. I'm almost done with it. I know you want to get to the essence of to the beginning of my lecture. I'm almost there. Activist stance against violence. Increase in the percentage of younger people voting. Again, I have the figure here, but I want to move forward. A combination of all these elements together joined to further boost the joint list significantly. Now I'm moving to the third section of the more interesting one perhaps. Can the electoral success be translated to tangible political achievement? Now, I should begin with the context. And beyond the significance of the unprecedented victory, one should ask the unavoidable and immediate question: what is the political efficacy, the effectiveness of the result? In the past, our political parties were marginalized and were ostracized. I should even use the stronger word. Never have they been a part of a governmental coalition. For obvious reason. If we're talking about the Arab national parties, how could they? No Zionist governmental coalition. For obvious reason. If we're talking about the Arab national parties, how could they? No Zionist government where Arabs were included in governments. But they were Arabs, Arab leaders who were associated with Zionist parties. Nawaf Masalha, for example, served as a minister on the Labour Party ticket. He don't know if the name means anything to anyone here. He just passed away the other week, unfortunately. But yeah, these were the good Arabs. But parties like Hadash, never. Communist Party, never. The only case where a minority government was the only case where a minority Zionist government was dependent on external support of Arab Knesset members was in 1992 under Rabin, who could form a coalition government and asked the support of 6 Arab Knesset members of the then Arab Democratic Party, which is now debunked, and Hadash, who agreed to support him from the outside for a short period of time, several weeks or maybe a month or two, in exchange of an agreement where he promised to do a long list of actions in support of the Arab sector. This lasted, as I said, for a couple of weeks, but then he managed to set up a Jewish coalition, and this was the end of it. This was the only case, but these two parties were not included in the coalition. That's it. And to date, when you speak to any Arab, anyone who is knowledgeable about the Arab sector affairs, they will tell you, oh, these were the golden days of Rabin. The fact that Rabin promised to break the bones of the Arabs in the first Intifada is forgotten. In other words, that he was a hawkish person. But these days are remembered as the golden days of relations between Rabin, and rightly so. I'm just mentioning. Okay, so let's proceed. Since 1992, the political power of the Arab electorate has strengthened considerably on the one hand, and the Jewish landscape, on the other hand, has reached a draw where none of the two major political blocs, the center-left and the right, cannot attain an overwhelming majority in the Knesset, as Yael has described. In the fragile situation formed following the 2020 election, the joint list, with a block of 15 Knesset seats, came to a position in which it could easily determine the future of a government coalition. Is it indeed so? Have the necessary condition to accept an Arab party as a partner for coalition been created? Doubtfully, from a point of view of the right-wing side of the political map. We need to examine this statement against the atmosphere of delegitimization and exclusion of the Arab sector, or the Arab party, or the Arab political scene in the recent years. In recent years, the Israeli Jewish society has become growingly racist in its attitudes towards the Arabs in Israel. And these trends can be easily traced through the private and the public sphere, on the political level and on the legislative domain. And I can discuss this in detail. I'll just give you a few examples. Netanyahu's call urging the Jewish electorate on election day in 2015 to vote because, quote, Arabs are rushing to the ballots. Remember that? Some of you who follow the Israeli politics. Became embedded in the collective memory of the Arabs and Jews in Israel. So go and vote for Likud because there is a danger that the Arabs will take over. April 2019, citing potential voter fraud, Likud provided activists with 1,200 hidden cameras to monitor, quote unquote, Arab polling station. Who heard about that? Nothing similar to that has been done in Jewish polling stations. Likud ran a series of negative ads depicting Arab Meccas as lazy do-nothings in February 2023. Lieberman has a long record of love letters to Arab citizens, Arab Knesset members, and so forth. Various legislative initiatives, various laws, loyalty laws, and so forth and so forth. Just recently, attempts to disqualify member Knesset, Heba Yazbak of the Balad Arab nationalist attempt that failed, and so forth and so forth. So under these circumstances and atmosphere, any chance for collaboration between right-wing led coalition and Arab legislator is inconceivable. Furthermore, even moderate center-left parties made sure to let their positions be known, lest they alienate their right of center potential voters. So you have to remember that Gantz, when he made these comments in 2019, was wary of his left of the center supporters. He didn't want to alienate these this block of potential supporters by creating the image, oh, he's going to collaborate with the joint list. No. He wanted to make sure that they support him. The same way that Ehud Barak in 1999 was concerned about this bloc. So, Gantz, who initially opposed to forming a coalition government with the Arabs, made sure before the election to say the following, and I quote him, because we'll see how he flip-flopped his position just a few days ago. He said the following, and I quote him, I am not afraid to speak to any legitimate political party, but the joint list will not be part of the government I form, says Benny Gantz. My disagreement with its leadership on national and security issues are deep, difficult, and unbridgeable. I will not sit with the joint list, and I do not need their support, unquote. Benny Gantz. 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks ago. So, as the final results of the 2020 elections came in and the political deadlock began to unfold, the situation dramatically changed overnight. In the light of the stalemate, and Gantz and Bibi unable to form a coalition government, and their own, unable to form a coalition government with their own natural Jewish allies, the political stakes of the joint list have miraculously escalated. The 180 degrees flip-flop in the distribution of the Knesset seats have forced both Gantz and Netanyahu to begin courting the Arabs in the coalition building. Chemi Shalev, the political correspondent of Haaretz, who is a very sharp-eyed observer, wrote that it took Gantz less than a week to go back on one of his central campaign promises, which I just quoted a page ago. And as he said, before election day, Gantz has consistently rebuffed Likud allegation that he would collaborate with Arab joint list. 5 days later, that is exactly what he was advocating. Suddenly, he internalized that his road to the prime minister chair might be dependent, after all, on the outside support of the joint list, support of the joint list of a minority coalition government, which he would build, as we know, and these are the present negotiations which are taking place. And today there was supposed to be a meeting. I don't know what the outcome is. They have already met, including Balad, which is a nationalist faction constituting one of the 4 parties which constitute. Surprisingly, Netanyahu himself, rumors have it, that his associates have recently offered to enter negotiations with Arab lawmakers. What? Yes. Again, rumors have it. I haven't been there. Reportedly, as they say. In exchange for the joint list not recommending Gantz as premier to President Reuven Rivlin, and not backing a bill floated by Blue and White to bar a person under indictment from first serving as prime minister. True, untrue, I don't know. I quote a piece in the news. Now, will the iron rule of no coalition government with external Arab support will be broken? At what price? The Arabs, as we have seen in the past, came up with a list of shopping. And this list of shopping has already been published, just as the case was in 1992. And let me share with you the ingredients or the elements of this list of shopping. Because do you think that Gantz would just get the support without paying a price? No. So here's the list. Revoking the Kamenetz law. Now, I don't know what the Kamenetz law is, but the Kamenetz law is a very, very central law that was legislated in the Knesset, which has stiffened penalties for illegal building. there are 60,000 illegal structures in the Arab sector. 60,000. So what they want is to remove this law. Number two, altering the status quo on Temple Mount. Small thing. Crafting a new peace plan. Crafting a new peace plan. Now, let me stop here and say, let's say 40% of these requirements are being agreed upon. 40%. But the list goes on. Eliminating discriminatory law like the nation-state law. A Kleinigkeit, they say in Yiddish, small thing. Nation-state law, which enshrines Israel as an exclusive nation-state of the Jewish people. Passing legislation that would better status Israel's Arab population, economic program to improve the economic situation of our population, and rumors have it that Gantz, and this is an interesting development, that Gantz might want to make a goodwill gesture in the form of appointing Salim Jubran, who is a former Supreme Court justice, retired, as a minister for civic rights. Now, this is a very interesting development, which I think would be a great idea. Another name was also mentioned, Advocate Muhammad Watar, the former head of local council. Okay. Let me sum up this moment and go towards my last point. The mere creation of such a weird coalition partners that I have now discussed is undoubtedly a turning point, a potential turning point in Israeli politics, and may well be, as another observer had put it, the foundation of a new political landscape. I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation a watershed, a turning point, I don't know. We will have to wait and see. However, let's do some speculation as well. Let's assume for a moment that the hopeful scenarios, which indeed herald a new era of inclusion and a paradigm shift, are not fulfilled. And Yael had already alluded to such possibility, that there will be defectors, even though they have not defected yet, but they are considering it. Two from Kahol Lavan, one from Gesher Avoda, and that there is no agreement in Kahol Lavan, I said, and other Zionist party. And if, for example, a national unity government is after all formed between Kahol Lavan and Likud, President Rivlin is working on this solution. This is something that he had wanted from the very start. And another possibility is that Bibi is removed. Now, once Bibi is removed, an obstacle is removed, and I think it will be much easier to create a national unity government between Gantz and whoever will be at the head of the Likud. And then there's no need for the joint list. Who needs the joint list? Which was a bone in the throat, as we say in Hebrew, to begin with. So what then? How would this impact the Arab sector? So now we become less optimistic and less, the situation is less bright. I think it will, number one, impact the internal cohesion of the joint list. It is the internal cohesion of the joint list is fragile or was fragile to begin with. It is made of four parties, something that I repeatedly mentioned, with no unified political platform or sound political background. These are strange bedfellows: communists, Islamists, reformists, traditionalists, secularists, and so forth, who were almost forced to join ranks together. In 2019, they already disbanded. external pressures were put on them to unite, starting from Abu Mazen to God knows who. And the threat of the threshold made them, Avigdor Lieberman wanted to prevent Arabs from getting into the Knesset, and the result was just the opposite. So being potentially left out by a Gantz-led minority government could easily lead to mutual accusations, internal rivalries, and a total collapse and disintegration of the list. Most importantly, loss of trust and faith by the Arab public. This would not do them good. It would definitely create heightened tensions within the Arab society and at the same time increase Jewish-Arab alienations within Israel. This might concurrently lead to a trend which we have witnessed in the past. Calls to boycott Knesset elections and set up alternative representative bodies in the Arab sector. Now, I want to highlight this point. The Islamic movement in Israel, which is doing well, even though the northern faction has been banned by the Israeli authorities in 2015, has been pushing voters to boycott elections. Now, you may say, look, 65% has voted, they have not been doing very well. True, but the call has been there. Arab members of the Knesset are continuously criticized for having limited influence. A failure of this kind would strengthen the calls to boycott the elections and leave the Knesset framework. It's waste of time. What are you doing there? What are your achievements? Why are we there? And instead, let's think of alternative framework of representation that will bear fruits, that will help change the situation of the Arab sector. An alternative that will, as I said, will bear fruits. And one such alternative that is being spoken of is the promotion of local governments, mayors, head of local councils, local municipalities as an alternative. This idea has been brought up in the past. I don't want to go into too much details here, but it is definitely being discussed. Now, it is too early to judge, and much of what I've said is speculative. Things change on a daily basis. We don't know what's going to happen. I have discussed several scenarios, but it sure adds to the sense of urgency that characterizes the junction in which the Arab public and Arab politics finds itself these days. And it's only within a week's time or even more that we'll be more knowledgeable as to what the results are. And if you insist, I will come back and further discuss it, whether there will be 3 people here or more. Thank you very much.
Mentioned that the coronavirus, which called off all events and went online, so people know who may not be from MSU why there's no audience. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
First, an easy question, or a short question. You mentioned the nation-state law. That also included a kind of change in the status of Arabic.
Yes, lowering the status of Arabic.
So for the ballots this time around, were they in Arabic and Hebrew, or
What?
The ballots that were used in the election?
The ballots?
The ballots, yes. Were they written?
They were in Arabic.
They were in Arabic, so it wasn't, in a sense, implemented all the way through. In that
No.
So,
To the best of my knowledge, they were in Arabic.
I was curious about your use of the term
Israelization, yes.
And on one hand, you were explaining it as kind of an increased integration or participation in Israeli institutions and Israeli political culture, I guess, primarily.
And social.
But it seemed like there was a kind of an interesting counter movement that if it is a process of Israelization, that resulted in more votes for Arab, broadly speaking, parties. That's kind of almost a countercurrent. Whereas in contrast, earlier you were saying where there was less Israelization, there were more votes for labor, for example, in the 70s. And you were contrasting it to the earlier decades where more Arab voters were voting for Zionist parties. So is that just kind of a cross current that, you know, more Israelization produces a more kind of self-definition in political parties? Or
Yeah, this is an excellent question. Thank you for raising this. Now, you see, in the past, why were we debating each other, Sami and I, in the 70s? Because there was an understanding that if there is an Israelization, there can't be Palestinization. They were mutually exclusive. I was understood to be saying that, you know, the rise in national consciousness was interpreted as eliminating any sense of belongingness to the Israeli statehood. In other words, feeling sense of Palestinian belonging was at the expense of being Israeli, and the other way around. The new phenomenon that evolved in the 80s, 90s was that the two were integrated into each other. I mean, you can be a loyal Israeli Palestinian or a Palestinian Israeli. And this is what we are witnessing now. The voting for an Israeli election doesn't mean that you are less loyal to your Palestinian sense of belonging. On the contrary, you're going to express your loyalty to the Palestinian cause through your Israeli elections, through being part of the Israeli parliament, through defending the Palestinian cause that's where the Knesset members would be saying, had Ahmad Tibi been here, this is what we... Now, you can further push me to the wall and say, so how does this work with the claim of those who criticize the Arab Knesset members, who say your time in the Knesset is a waste of time? The critics of the Arab Knesset members say, this is very nice, but we don't care about this. We care about the local problems of our communities, and you don't do enough. You don't have any leverage on changing the local status of our localities. The fact that you defend the head of the Palestinian Authority and the Knesset doesn't help the situation of our schools or our clinics or our state of our paved roads. So you see, it's a very complex situation of contradictions and conflating circles that sometimes border next to each other, sometimes conflict each other, sometimes correspond to each other, and all live together in a classical Israeli balagan. Yes. So there is a process of Israeliness, and the question is, what's the bottom line? Do they coexist or do they explode? And what I'm concerned about is the state of explosion, and I can further expand on that if you wish. Yes.
I was going to just add a little anecdote to what you just said. So this past summer, I was on a study tour conducted by Ken Bob, who's the head of a MANO, Progressive Zionist Organization. And one of the places we went to was Lod. Well, both Jews and Arabs, and we were shown around by one of the Arab residents who's running community centers there. And he was asked who he was voting for. He said, I'm not voting at all. And asked why. He said, well, these Arab politicians, when we elect to the Knesset, they're from the north. They really don't know or care anything about people like us here.
Yeah. So So those who voted had hoped that they might really, these joint lists, there were hopes that they might join a coalition, or at least from the outside, because talks about similar such talks were raised in the previous round of elections. So I guess that's part of the propaganda of the party, was that, yeah, hey guys, we might introduce a change. Give us your votes. Let's see what's happening. And by the, I just read today that somebody said from Al-Fahim, if there will be a fourth round, we'll get 18 seats, which I don't think is feasible, but this is another thing. So there is this expectations and willingness to, we're almost there. But on the other hand, you know, how much can you be disappointed? How much? Because if this doesn't work now, I think the outcome will be very negative. I think the disillusionment and the feeling of being outcasted, because I don't think that anybody would go, the outcome would be negative. I'm very concerned about that. In fact. Yes, yeah.
You correctly emphasized that so often Zionist parties have refused to allow Arab parties in Israel into the coalition government. But simultaneously, you also have the phenomena where sometimes these same parties refuse to back, even from the outside, a center-left party that might be coming to government in the past, right? So what kind of is changing right now in terms of the dynamics of the joint list's willingness to perhaps back against it all? You mentioned that perhaps the primary motivator is the perceived threat by Netanyahu and the Trump plan, you know, on one hand. On the other hand, it seems that that's something that was alluded to here, that sometimes the Arab citizenry also doesn't feel fully represented by their leadership or fully satisfied by the leaders of their parties, because they often have been seemingly more willing to form a coalition with Zionist parties than the leadership of the Arab parties. So it seems like you have these two factors simultaneously, the threat of Netanyahu and the Trump plan on one hand, but also this continuing, perhaps more pragmatic citizenry than the leadership has been, enabling the leadership to contemplate kind of supporting a narrow coalition. So I wanted you to kind of elaborate on that dynamic and how those two things are working together in this point in time. And then finally, sorry, that's a long-winded question.
No.
If it's the case that partly all along, a lot of citizens are dissatisfied with their own leadership in some of these Arab parties, perhaps then that would lead, in your worst case scenario, to this kind of deep disillusionment if they're not brought into a coalition. I wonder if that would be mitigated at all by that. But anyway, so I wanted to elaborate on that.
I'm not optimistic, and I'm concerned, number one, that this process will not lead to any concrete results. My political instincts tell me that there is more chance for a national unity government, either with Netanyahu ousted or with Netanyahu in, with the involvement of the president, negotiating between the two parties and really removing this obstacle. This is, you know, I don't think that the Israeli political landscape has reached a level of maturity to accept willingly the Arabs as a partner. This to me looks artificial. This to me looks superimposed. This is not a natural process that has evolved over the years, that has been preceded by a long period of preparation, of preparatory stage, of discourse, of discussions, of discussion groups that have been held between teams of the two. This came out of the blue because of political necessities, because of political constraints, mostly on the Jewish side, not on the Arab side. These are constraints of the Jewish side that found themselves locked in a political situation that they can't move anywhere. So they say, oh, well, that's all we have. And I would even say that the rise in the voting turnout of the Arab sector is artificial to a large extent. Now I'm saying heresy here, because everybody's, and I myself, I'm contradicting my own my own saying, because I said I gave a very structured lecture here with five points as they taught us in school. Very nice.
Artificial, or do you mean temporary?
I'm sorry.
Temporary better than
Thank
artificial?
you, sir. Thank you. You're good. You're a good listener. Artificially temporary, or temporary artificial, whatever. No, yes, that because it doesn't have a deep-rooted historical background. That it is the outcome of a lengthy process, political process. And again, furthermore, when I spoke about internal cohesion, this should have been a point that I should have expanded on much more. And when I spoke about the local council as an alternative, the Arab society, generally in the Middle East, particularly in the Palestinian society, and more particularly so in Israel proper, with all the process of modernism and modernity and so forth, is still a tribal society. Tribal society that is fragmented and fragile and divided. And therefore, tomorrow, this whole joint list can break into pieces. And we already have one element, Balad, the nationalist wing, which is is really pushed into this negotiation force. They don't want to ruin and Metan Shehadeh, the head of the list, was, by the way, Christian to the best of my knowledge, which is also an element. It's really eclectic, all this. Said, yeah, we don't agree, but we will follow the rule of the group. Because he's put in an impossible situation. How can he come against it? Is he going to ruin the party? He can't ruin the party. So let me put it this way. From the little I know about the Israeli political scene, the very first moment there is a possibility to find a way out of this political crisis without the Arabs, both political sides of the Israeli political scene will rush to do it. And let me make things clear, because I'm on record. I'm the first one that would have wanted things differently. But to tell you that I've witnessed the process that have led to this point where there is a brotherly situation where Arabs have been absorbed towards an inclusion, where is this inclusion? On Bibi's side? On Gantz's side, whom I quoted here? I mean, I'm an organized person. I came with quotes. It's not that on an election campaign. The guy said 3 months ago, tuck. Now he embraces that. So I say, okay, politics, everything is fine. I changed my mind. I reviewed the situation. Now I see that you're a serious guy. Now that we can't kiss now, but let's embrace because of Corona. I'm sorry. Yes.
So is there any backlash against Gantz for switching or reversing his stance?
No, he reconsidered the situation.
But in Kahol Lavan, there's no supporters on.
Well, Kahol Lavan, as Yael hinted, she went one step further because of the coronavirus, and she already turned them into defectors. They haven't defected yet. They are considered Yoaz Hendel and Zvi Hauser. From the very start, they said that they oppose any collaboration, any the establishment of any minority group that would depend on the support, the outside support. This is what we're talking about. Yes, let's take a pause and regroup. What are we talking about? We're talking about setting up a minority government, okay, which means less than 61 Knesset members, because Gantz does not have 61 Knesset members. Where, in case they need, on crucial Knesset votes, they will need 61 votes to support, then the 15 joint list members will be asked to raise their hand. This is all. And as Lapid said, what's the whole story? Once we will ask the Arabs to vote, to raise their voices, their hands once. That's all. I would add in a very vicious way, once we will need to take an anti-vomit pill. This is very bad what I'm saying now. That's all. Makara, what's the big thing? Once we will take a pill and that's all. So this is the whole thing. So you ask me if we reach this point? No.
Just to
And
follow up,
so to follow up, so there are these two guys. Orly Levi Abexis woke up this morning or yesterday, she said, Mapito, I'm not going to support this government. It's against my principles. Where were you a month ago when you said on record that you will? So you ask, is this politics? Yes, this is politics. The principle is not worth the air of the word that is being ousted. That's politics. What, in this country it doesn't happen? Your country is immune from this?
I was actually,
No, I'm joking, of course.
but it's also from the opposite side as well, because Gantz had all the advertisements in terms of.
Correct.
You know,
Correct.
and so why are and why is the Arab coalition willing to talk to Gantz?
Because they believe that they can reach achievement, that they would. You saw the list. That's why I brought the list of shopping. Now, if they will get 20% of this, they can come to the voter and say, look what I have achieved. I have number 2, 3, 4 of the list. Then they can come, and we said this is just the beginning, and we will go further. And when the vote in the Knesset will come, we will remind him, hey, but you forgot to. And beware, we're going, our hands are flexible. We did some exercises yesterday, and our hand goes up and down, and and don't forget that, and so forth. And so, do I have to tell you what gymnastics is all about? That's the way it works. But again, let's be serious for a moment. We are asking about trends, about changes over time. Over time. This is not a change. It's a beginning. It's a beginning. To tell you that I view, that's why I was so cautious. That's why I added with bad news. Because the bad news is that there are buts, there are the beginnings. But if you follow the press, and I was reading the press and I continue, the press is excited. The press likes this news. I mean, 70% of the news that deals with the elections are all excited about this change of paradigm, watershed, all these words that are taken out of the thesaurus. But for the learned observer, it takes more than that. And in 5 years' time, we may say that, yes, the 2020 was the beginning of a change. I don't know to what direction. This is only historical perspective will tell us where we go. And since it's now all recorded, I will be remanded, either for good or worse, but I will probably not be around anymore. Eric.
Any other questions? My second or third. So but it seems like this is maybe the utopian in me. You're kind of saying political and cultural change needs to kind of be nurtured and come from the bottom up. Are there also examples, though, in history, in U.S. politics and Israeli politics, where almost the model is more like a siphon? You kind of reach that top, and then once it starts to flow, suddenly you're over a hump that you didn't. And I'm thinking of civil rights in the United States. That was not something that massive numbers were carefully cultivated in order to create legal civil rights change. In some ways, it happened things happened at the top and then worked their way down.
I have an
Obama
answer.
becoming president, people weren't like, this is we're ready for this now. It's going to happen now. It happened, and now we happily, won't go back to a time where there wasn't a black president, right? So these are weak analogies. I'm just kind of spitballing here and saying you
Excellent
seem to be
question.
saying, it's not going to happen without this long bed of preparation. And I'm kind of like, could it be the other way, that for political expediency, for power principles and issues, just to kind of get power for guns, something happens where suddenly something that never happened happens,
Yeah.
and then it becomes the new reality. The world doesn't end, and suddenly, and that's not even counting the coronavirus. My next question is, what does the coronavirus might do to this kind of political negotiations? Because there's a crisis there as well. But set that aside.
Yeah, this would be very difficult for me. But
Yeah.
I think the first part of your question is more serious. So if I were you, or if I were Gantz, or if I were myself, I would take one page out of all this learned lecture. This is the page or the passage that discusses the rise of a new middle class. It's maybe 5 lines, no more. But this, I think, is the most significant part of my presentation. Now, this says it all. This is it. Because if my observation is true, and I haven't studied it enough, and I wish I would, and hopefully I would, and I wish someone would, then this is really a sea change. Because these guys can really turn because the politicians are politicians. They're short-sighted. They are ready for anything. They want power. They want, and you see, they are. I don't want to call names, but they. We talked earlier about vision, about loyalty to principle, values, and all that. This is BS. Excuse me. The only guy, the serious guy, is the guy from Balad. He's been loyal to his principles, also to a degree. You see, he also bent. Where was he 3 months ago where he wasn't ready to go? He wasn't ready to go to the president. Now he goes to the president. If I was one of his loyalists, I would say, well, what is this? Now he got another member of his party into the Knesset, Sami Abu Shahada. So, flexibility is the name of the game. However, going back to your question, to those real, I would go to the rise of the middle class, because this is already a significant change. Because you have here a group of people who's already entrenched into Israeli society. And this entrenchment is like a tree that was planted 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And not only do you see the leaves and the flowers and the fruit coming out, but you also see the roots going down. Because you go on Saturday night or Friday night and you go to the Tel Aviv port and you sit in a restaurant. And I tell my wife, I said, Liora, the couple behind us or the couple of families are our families. She said, no way. So I said, yes. So she said, how do you know? I said, I know. She said, prove to me. I said, they speak Arabic. She said, so what does it say? I said, anyway, I'll cut the long story short. I said, these are families from Jaffa who come to spend their leisure time at Tel Aviv port. You know Tel Aviv port, those of you who've been to Israel. And their leisure time, the spending of the leisure time is just identical to us. Furthermore, I said, look at the promenade at the Tel Aviv. Look at the couple who are walking to and fro. These are Islamic couple, but now I can't go wrong because the woman is muhajjaba. And there are not too many Jewish women who go with hijab on Friday night. Right? She says, right. Now, what does this mean? Or you go to Ben Gurion Airport on without the coronavirus, and you see half of the plane are of Arab families who take vacations to the Balkans or to. I'm not talking about going to Turkey or Egypt like it used to be 10 or 15, because these were destinations that were planned for Arabs, right? No. The same as any middle-class family could afford to go to Italy for 13 days or, all these things. These are the signs of integration.
I would add to that list what's the name of the mall in outside Mamila Mall outside the old city?
Look at the percentage of students at the Technion. You know that 21% of the students of Technion are Arab students. No, I don't like this. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry about these. I don't like these comparisons. 21% of the students in the Technion are Arabs, equal to the percentage of the. Now, what does it mean? I don't want to, to boost and say, look, how progressive we are. 21%. No, this means that the fact that 21% chooses to study at the Technion means that they assess that they will find work. Otherwise, they wouldn't have gone to the Technion, I assume. They wouldn't assume that they will find work. You don't go and study medicine if you don't assume that you'll find work as a doctor. And I know this because I studied the question of there is a big number of university graduates who do not find work in their professions. It's another story. What does it mean? Look at the number of pharmacists. You go to any pharmacy today, the only language you speak with is Arabic. Now again, it's not that simple. There's nothing to be proud of that issue because they are low paid. So there are signs, and the discrepancies are huge between Jews and Arabs. Huge. Paradoxically, it's Bibi who helped raise the standards of the Arab society in Israel. Why? Because he's interested in raising the standards of the Arab society in Israel. Because he's concerned about Israel's positioning on the OECD. The Arabs and the ultra-Orthodox, that's why he poured billions into the Arab sector. Doesn't matter. It's good. So the most important thing is the rise. Speaking about undercurrents, this is what I consider seriously. This, again, don't misunderstand me. Hopefully something will come out of this, and if not this time, next time, and hopefully this will not lead to a downfall, to a crisis, to a traumatic experience with no, I hope not. But we have to be realistic. Let's not be overjoyed and look at the picture from all its angles and study from the past. Why do we learn history for? We are, with all due respect to political science, and we like models and boxes and arrows, and we love it. We also need to learn a little bit about history.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for coming and risking your health to.
Yeah, so I'm trying to, because before this event, there was